What I'm trying to do today is basically a highly personal presentation of some research findings I really like, and I really like to translate them into practice as well. So this is partly insights that document my research, but mostly this is research from the very best journals, and I really like to share these insights with you because I'm really passionate about all this stuff. I would like to begin by showing you the results of a quite well-known experiment in marketing. In the 70s or so, they asked people coming into a research lab to actually taste beer. And they gave people several glasses of beer and actually put the logos on the beer glasses. And then they asked people, please rate these beers on two dimensions. Is the beer either premium or regular? Is it light versus strong? So when people rated these things, it appeared that brands are quite nicely differentiated. For instance, Budweiser here was seen as being premium and in between light and strong. Guinness was strong. Colt 45, I don't know that beer, but it was a strong one, and more towards premium. It was very interesting to see what actually happened when they didn't have the labels on or the logos on. And this is what we normally call a blind test. What do you think happened? As you might see here, most of the brands came, or most of the beers came being rated in between premium and regular, and on average quite light. Except for Guinness, which is more easily told that it's a strong beer with a specific taste, and people can tell that they drink a Guinness when they drink it actually. So what does it say about the power of brands? Are brands strong? Are brands powerful? I would contend that they are. So actually brands can sway our opinions, our perceptions to quite a bit of an extent. Now the interesting question here is, did people actually rate these brands the way they did because they knew that, for instance, a Budweiser should stand for a premium beer and somewhere in between light and strong? Or did actually knowing what beer they are drinking change their perception and their senses? You're going to say, this guy is totally mad. How can a brand change your senses? Well, actually this has been addressed in research that followed. And again, this is a piece of research on beer, so don't think I'm a very heavy beer drinker, but this is just very nice research that I want to report to you today. So the question is, does a brand actually sway your perception? Does it actually make you feel something different? Or is it just a piece of information that you're using to rate a product in a certain way? Actually, a brand, just like marketing communication, is a piece of information. So the general question is, how does a brand, a piece of marketing information, or how does marketing information or communication sway people's perceptions? And actually, this is a very fun study that they did at the MIT campus in the US. They went to student pubs and they gave people 2 beers to taste from. One of them was what they called a regular beer that people were kind of used to, and then they also came up with this novel MIT beer. They actually had students taste the 2 beers, and they made people choose one of those 2 beers. What the guys who were tasting the beers didn't know is that the MIT beer was actually a regular beer being adulterated with 2 drops of vinegar. And they didn't know that, obviously. So then people tasted the beers and they made their choice. Actually, 68 of the people chose the MIT beer. They thought it tasted good. They liked it. Nice. So it seems that adding vinegar to a beer is a good idea in the first place. But this is not what I want to tell you about. What they did then to other people, this is like an experiment. This is actually a field experiment. What they did actually, they gave other people the same 2 beers, but before having them taste the beers, they let them know that the MIT beer actually has vinegar into it. So you see, we are in a situation quite similar to what I showed you before. Here people don't know what they're tasting. Here they know what they're tasting actually. And what happened here, we had a choice and only 40% of the people chose the MIT beer. So statistically this is a significant drop in the choice rate for the MIT beer. So far we are pretty much at the same point where the previous example left us. We know what we're drinking versus we don't know what we're drinking, and then we're rating, or in this case choosing differently. So how do we know whether branding actually changes the experience, our senses? They did a very smart thing into this, in this study. Actually, they had people taste again the two beers. So they let them taste the beers, and only then did they tell people that the MIT beer has vinegar into it, and only afterwards did people make the choice. So actually, if branding changes senses, you know, the way we perceive and sense things, we would expect to see the quite a bit of a difference in between this and this situation. Because if things were equal here and here, it means that we are just using branding as a piece of information, and it doesn't actually alter our senses. And actually 62% of the people chose the MIT beer, a significant increase on 40%, and not significantly different from here. So this is quite nice evidence that branding as a piece of marketing information can actually change our perceptions. It can change our senses. More recent research has been done about what this does to the chemicals in our head and so on. So you might see, or you might say that, you know, this guy is getting a bit esoterical here. So this research has been pursued, and more insights have been generated. But the whole idea is that branding and marketing information changes the way we feel and perceive the world around us, which is a very strong argument in the favor of the power of brands, actually. A famous study was done here at some point in the UK about T-Mobile. T-Mobile leases its mobile network to Virgin Mobile. So they had the customers of these two mobile companies rate the sound quality for either T-Mobile or Virgin Mobile. And actually the sound quality should be the same because they are using virtually the same network. Well, surprisingly, people or the customers of Virgin Mobile rated the sound quality much better than the customers of T-Mobile. Once again, why? Branding. So you see, branding has quite a bit of a power to change the way you perceive things. I wanted to tell you about a great discovery being done in the 18th century in Italy. And this is about a physicist called Gerbi. So Gerbi, he was dealing with people who reported having a toothache. So he was kind of a dentist of these days. So what he observed is that if he rubbed the secretion of a certain type of worm onto the teeth of his patients, the patients reported that the pain was going away. And actually, Gerbi continued applying his treatment over and over again, and patients seemed to get better. Actually, Gerbi kept very detailed records of what he was doing, and 1 year on, most patients, 68% of his patients reported that the toothache was going away. We nowadays know that Gerbi's cure didn't have anything to do with curing diseases or curing toothaches. All that matters is that Gerbi believed that this can alleviate toothaches, and more importantly, it's very important that the patients for the same. This can take your toothache away. And basically what we're talking about here is an example of a placebo effect. So brands tend to have quite a bit of a placebo effect. Imagine that you're wearing a pair of Armani jeans, and it makes you feel cool, it makes you feel sexy, you fit so well in them, and then you're comparing them against a pair of H&M jeans, which are virtually the same, and they wouldn't make you feel the same. So this, just speaks for the power of branding. I want to talk about, I told you about Armani, which is a fancy brand. Let's talk about a brand at the other end of the fanciness scale. Let's talk about Lidl. What do you guys think about Lidl?
Low cost.
Low cost? Quality? How is it?
Quality. High quality.
High quality. Anybody thinks the same? Anybody thinks differently? Okay. I think that many people will actually say that it's
surprisingly high quality.
Surprisingly high quality. Is there anybody here who thinks that Lidl stands for poor quality? Okay, we have Professor Knox here thinking that. Tim?
I think not so much what they sell, but the experience. Running the sound snobbish, but
I think that I would say that most people, if you go out there and ask people about it, they will tell you that Lidl is poor quality. And actually, this is what most people report. It's a poor experience. They are not so tidy. They come up with these products that nobody knows about. And in general, people will say that these are poor quality products. Let's look at some blind tests having been done here in the UK. What are the UK's best mayors? So they compared mayos in blind tests, and actually they showed that both Lidl's and Aldi's mayos rated higher than Hellmann's and then Heinz, and then the own brands of Sainsbury's, of Asda, of Tesco in blind tests. So basically, these mayos were when tasted in blind conditions, they were rated as better. And the funny thing is that the price of a mayo from Lidl is just 1/3 of the price of the Hellmann's mayo. So if this is not strong enough, let's look at Chanel perfume or Lidl perfume. What do you think about this one? So they did a blind smell test. So they had people smell either Coco Mademoiselle versus the very famous Suddenly Madame Glamour. You guys know the Suddenly Madame Glamour, right? So they had people actually smell these things and rate their preference. Well, funnily enough, 90% of the people said this was better. Lidl's perfume, was actually chosen by 90% of the participants in this study. You know what the funny thing is? This guy costs 61 pounds, this costs 3.99.
You should have brought some in.
Yeah, I should have brought some in, yeah. Yes, please.
Is there anything to do with target marketing going on here that's missing in this blind test?
This, I think, was controlled in this experiment. Obviously, you can contend that the single best quality of an expensive perfume is to last. So there are many things which have to be taken into the picture. But simply if you look at the smell of this thing, it seems that the Lidl perfume smells better than the very fancy Coco Chanel perfume. Once again, this was a blind test. Imagine what would have happened if people knew what actually they were smelling.
Okay.
What about 2012 Easter eggs? This was yet another funny ranking that I saw online. This was a blind test again. This is how the ranking looked like. The Galaxy came first. Asda, which is by no means the most upper scale supermarket in this country, they came second. Lidl third. Sainsbury's. Kit Kat is at the bottom. Lindt is somewhere in the 6th place. So basically, it seems that Lidl's turn out quite a few good products. I'm not going to tell you that all their products are very good, but quite a few of them are. They seem to be suffering from a poor brand perception, and this is coloring our perception of the quality of the products at Lidl's. And actually, if we look at the customer satisfaction ratings, so this is customers at each of these retailers. Waitrose comes in first, Aldi second, Lidl third, and then all the bigger, stronger, nicer supermarkets are afterwards. What do you think about this? So, I think this refutes a bit our perception about Lidl selling poor quality products. But just like Armani benefits from its high quality perceptions, Lidl's will suffer from these, right? Because people associate Lidl with something else. Yes, please.
I think it does make the argument that, as was mentioned, that it's not just satisfaction and not just preference, it's actually about experiences as well.
Yeah.
And the little brand may be great, but you go in there and it's brown boxes and strange people all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, these are all associations with the brand. That's exactly the point. And that's coloring our impressions about the products. But look, in blind tests actually, so you might, possibly lead a better life if you go to Lidl and shop your products, because, they would cost you much less, so you end up, saving a few good hundred of quid per month, and you get better quality.
But that ignores the experience, which may have value to you.
Actually, Lidl has been, I've seen, having lived in Norway, I know what they've done wrong, or I've seen quite a few things they've done wrong there. Where I actually live, I live very close to a Lidl, and actually they introduced one of these bread ovens, which looks very nice and very fancy. And that managed to elevate perceptions of quality quite a bit. And actually they now sell very good bread at the Lidl's where I go. So Lidl's can proactively do some tricks, to increase the quality perception. On several occasions they just sold their own products, they didn't bring in any reputed brands, which they now do. They have some reputed brands. So there are many strategies that even low-cost retailers such as Lidl, that, surprise, surprise, actually have very good products, can do to increase quality perceptions. Yes, at the end of the day, it lies in our minds as customers. So perception rules. We have some other questions here. Yes, please.
What would you say about the expectations? I mean, the Lidl has 68% customer satisfaction.
wouldn't you think that was linked to the fact that they have very low expectations?
I don't think that if you look at satisfaction, you know, it's actually this paradigm is, yes, expectations are one thing, right? On the other hand, you know, they've shown that actually customer satisfaction varies directly with how high and low the expectations are. So actually there are two factors entering that equation. So this is, yes, this is based on, you know, what Lidl customers versus Waitrose customers versus Sainsbury's customers say. But this doesn't make the Lidl customers any worse people, if you know what I mean. You know, it's just that they have, you know, different, you know, this is what, you know, we are mostly satisfied with. And I think that by and large, most of us at some point in our life, we shop in different supermarkets, so we kind of see. I mean, I'm always surprised to see that I'm going to Sainsbury's, which I really like, as compared to Lidl's, and you know, my shopping baskets cost something like 40% less when I go to Lidl's. Yes, please.
I think it's not insignificant in this, but if you look at UK retail performance in the last couple of years, who've outperformed the market? Waitrose, Aldi, and Lidl. So it's at either end of the spectrum that you're getting out.
That's a very good observation, because what happens in times of recessions in a market, we get a polarization of the market. You know, you get either the high end or the low end of the market. So that's yet another thing that speaks in favor of why this is happening here. That's a very good
both of these guys start to wear each other's clothes. So if you go into Waitrose, you'll see there's a value range. If you go into Lidl, you'll see they're introducing premium ranges.
Yes.
So they both start to mimic each other, because actually they're appealing to a similar psychographic, not so much demographic, but a psychographic.
I think that you're right. Actually, what they've shown is that, you know, in many countries, and where I come from, you know, I'm Romanian, but you know, maybe in Eastern Europe quite a bit, people still think, or you know, they think more than here, that store brands or own brands are not actually the best quality. Go to a country such as Switzerland, where the penetration of own brands is something like 50% these days. And that's a quite developed country. So actually, in terms of psychographics, you know, some people know that it's not necessarily the brand, you know, that gives you the quality. There are more things to it. Of course, you have the retail brand and so on. But this speaks a lot about, you know, the psychographics, and I do agree with it. I want to pursue by showing you a very nice example. I really love this one. What they did in this study, they had people come into a computer lab, and they had people play a computer game, actually a car driving computer game. And basically they let people drive all these 5 cars. There was a car with a Red Bull logo on it, one with a Guinness logo. This had Coke, this had Tropicana, and this had no logo on it. So people had to drive 5 laps with each of these cars in a random order. These cars are identically the same, you know, from a technical point of view, it's the same software, they are just the same. The only thing that was varied in the software was what logo was on these cars. Surprise, surprise, what they found is that the fastest lap that people drove was driven with the Red Bull. Surprisingly, the lap with the most accidents was also the Red Bull. What did you think about that? Now, brands act as primes subconsciously, because people associate Red Bull with power, with recklessness, with speed. This actually made people act in that way. And I really find this study quite neat. In similar lines, in another study, they primed people subliminally with either Apple or IBM. This was actually done before IBM sold, or the data was collected before IBM sold its computer division. But people were primed subliminally, meaning that, you know, outside of awareness. So people, you know, the naked eye wouldn't have been able to observe this. After having done this, they asked the participants in their study to embark upon a creativity test. And what did the creativity test consist of? People had to name as many as possible unusual uses for a brick. So don't tell me that a brick is for construction, because that's quite obvious. Don't tell me that a brick is for flying, because it's not, we know that. Tell me something unusual about a brick. So somebody might have said, you know, a brick can be used to hold the door. A brick can be used, you know, to hold the, you know, a stack of paper onto a table and stuff like that. And so then they asked people to do this. Actually, what they found is that when people were primed with Apple, they came up with significantly more unusual uses within a given time than when they were primed with IBM. Why again? Because the concept of Apple elicited ideas of creativity, innovativeness, think different, whereas in their study IBM was more associated with being traditional, serious, delivering its promise, but not with the idea of innovativeness. Actually, this was mirrored in the way that judges, looking from outside and seeing how people, what people came up with, judged the creativity of the participants. So, are brands powerful? I think that we're building the case here that brands are quite powerful. I would like to show you some more dimensions about, that might speak for the power of brands. What we first learn about any concept in life, and about a brand as well, is pretty much there to stay. It can be very powerful if well communicated. Information association with a certain brand can be very powerful and can actually buffer a brand against crisis. So, I guess everybody here will remember the Toyota problem, right? About the acceleration, about the accidents and so on. That was major. Many people predicted that Toyota would go bust. I think General Motors and all the other guys were very happy over it and said, these guys are off the market, let's just talk American cars again and stuff like that. And why haven't they go bust? Well, because that first piece of information that people had in their minds was that Toyota was of quality, it was delivering its promise, it was reliable, it was economy. Those things resisted. Of course, there is also the PR that came in. Toyota didn't go out and say, just make a, they didn't overly apologize over it. They made the apology, they did their thing, and then they started to do the PR in the sense of actually swaying the attitudes in the right direction. But at the end of the day, when you have a very strong brand into place, that's going to be very hard to put down. Think of the BP scandal. So 1 year back, everybody was saying, BP is going to go bust. People still talk about it today. Next year, nobody's going to talk about it, and they are going to be back where they were. Yes, please.
I'm reliably told that within 2 days of going bust,
You think?
they ran out of cash.
Oh, okay.
So they bloody nearly did.
All right. Okay, if you say that.
And they're still pumping money into the Gulf of Mexico, having to sell assets still, so it's not going away yet. Share prices way down.
We're talking now about financial things and so on. I think that in terms of brand itself, what people are going to remember at the end of the day, unless that negative publicity, which was very strong, and has been there for a long time, was so strong, we are still going to survive. I mean, I'm not going to say otherwise, but I think that in most situations when a strong brand suffered from a major crisis, it emerged successful back because of some very strong associations. But what you're saying, I'm not, I don't have all the data. But I would tend
Anderson's Consulting.
Anderson Consulting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Enron.
Yeah, Toyota. I mean, we can talk. We are talking about many other factors out there. What I'm trying to say here, I give you an example of what happened in Norway when I was living there. They have this major brand of meat, and they were producing, among others, ground beef. It was the leader. In Norway, you see many brands that have 80% of the market. And basically, kids died because of having eaten that meat. And it was a major scandal. 1 year on, the brand was still there, very happily enjoying its profits and so on. So yes, it would be interesting to see when a brand scandal can actually affect you. What I'm trying to contend here is that it's the first thing that you associate with the brand, and if that association is strong and positive, that's going to buffer you against others. On another note, so what you think about me today is that I'm a total nutcase. That might be living on 1 year on, 2 years on. So the first association that you have with the brand is actually a very strong one, and very, very hard to put down. This takes me into another consideration about an effect that we call blocking. And I'd like to give you here an example of a brand such as Tylenol. This is an analgesic. You guys might have heard about it. Tylenol commands a share of 15% plus of the American market. And then you have all the generics. What do these things have in common? They're all based on paracetamol. So their chemical composition is just the same. At the end of the day, the products are just the same. But still, these guys have a 15% plus market share in the US, and their price is a 150% price premium against the generics. Why is this happening? Well, people when they first came across Tylenol, they knew that that was the thing to actually alleviate headaches. And people made an implicit association that the brand determines quality. The brand is the one that actually is reducing, my headache. Instead of, so they wrongly inferred it was the brand instead of the chemical composition of the qualities of the product, characteristics of the product. Then generics came into the market. But at this point, people still thought, that it was the brand that was, causing quality. So therefore, this was blocking the information that it was actually the chemical composition that was reducing the headache. So in this way, generics might have a much harder fight to put up against well-known, renowned brands than they have thought to, because they were not the first brand to be there and actually to deliver that benefit. And actually, I had a lady last time, I presented this in Norway a few times ago. I had a lady from Canada, and she came to me after the seminar, and she told me, you're totally right. Many years on, after having moved from Canada to Norway, I was still asking my family to send me Tylenol through packages, because I thought that was the thing that was taking my headache away. You can see this is actually very, very strong. Another very cool thing about brands is that many brands are out there and are very powerful because they managed to pioneer a certain category or subcategory. And I'm going to give you two examples here. So if we say, which is the smartphone, what would you guys say? Which is the smartphone? iPhone?
HTC.
Yeah, I have an HTC as well, but I guess most people out there will say it's an iPhone. So in that respect, iPhone dominates the category. It's more strongly associated with the idea of smartphones. Even though iPhone was not, or Apple was not the first company to launch a smartphone. They are not. But they built this perception that they are the smartphone. Which is the hybrid car? Toyota Prius, I would say. Yeah, so they build this perception for being the pioneers in the market and to dominate them. Why is that important? In marketing or in consumer behavior, actually, people many times have to make a decision. Today I'm going to go shopping, so let me see where I'm going, to Tesco's, to Waitrose, to Sainsbury's, to Lidl's. So what this basically does, we create a consideration set, and we tend to choose one of the brands from there. But if you dominate a certain association or category, you're going to think, okay, I'd like to buy myself a new car, and I'd like to buy myself a hybrid car. Which is the car that I'm going to buy? Toyota Prius? Well, actually a car purchase is a bit more complex than that, but the first thing that pops up in your mind is Toyota Prius. Wrigley's dominated the chewing gum market many years before actually having introduced their chewing gums, and they were the dominant and the pioneer and the dominant brand in the category. Another reason why it's a good idea to try to introduce this perception that you're the pioneer in the category and you're dominating the category is because other people are going to come and copy you. They're going to be Me Too brands, and you might think that's going to be trouble. Some guys are coming copying us and taking market share away from us. This is not necessarily true, because when a Me Too brand comes and wants to imitate the Prius or the iPhone here, what they do basically, they send a signal that the ideal attribute configuration of this product is the configuration that the iPhone was offering you to start with. And actually, this might actually pay a favor to the market pioneer, and you might actually get to increase the market share of the pioneer. Why is this not happening? Well, we have pricing, we have many issues out there, right? But this is a fact which has been documented. In many cases, if somebody wants to copy you, and you have the strong brand in there, actually they might be helping you without knowing it. So you see a strong brand that manages to dominate a category and to be to be perceived as the pioneer is likely to have a very strong market position. So if you want to fight such a strong brand in the market, you're better off launching a brand in another subcategory. So let's say that you want to launch a brand that is going to fight toothpaste such as Colgate and Blend and Med, then you might want to launch a brand in a pump container or something, so clear differentiation that is going to position you clearly differently from the market dominating brands.
Could I just check?
Yes, please.
On your previous slide,
yes.
I think that's quite interesting when you ask the question, which is the smartphone?
Yeah.
Because actually we're thinking product, not necessarily thinking brand. But of course we know that the iPhone is made by Apple. But first we're thinking about product. And there's an interesting relationship there between the product and the brand, and how closely that connection is communicated through marketing.
I totally agree with it, because
Could the product become a brand? Is as significant as the brand?
I mean, we're still marketing. You know what David Aker says in his latest books and articles. He says that we're still trying to instate the perception that this is a novel category, right? But when people actually elicit that category or that concept of the product, they are going to automatically elicit with it the brand. In many situations, yes, we actually look for a certain product, and then if we are strong enough to dominate that association, we are going to come on top. So basically, if you do that, people are not going to consider other brands. So you make other brands irrelevant, and this is one of the main points that David Aker actually had in his book. Brands are prevalent in our lives. A very important role for brands is to actually have symbolic benefits. What this means is that people use brands to communicate their self-identity, what they stand for, what is their, how do they want to be perceived out there. And this is pretty much the case of Apple, right? People do that a lot. A brand such as Apple is so strong, and people want to make a statement with it. Symbolic benefits can also be in terms of communicating your adherence to a certain social group. So, for instance, I myself like I like the Innocence movies quite a bit, because it makes me, you know, it makes me perceive that I'm a more responsible consumer, and I like to be healthy and stuff like that. Actually, there is a lot of literature out there showing that people build relationships with brands just like they build relationships with people. Funnily enough, we tend to relate to brands just like we do with people. And actually, there is a well-known marketing professor, Suzanne Fournier, who came up with a typology of different brand relationships by drawing similarities and documenting that they are pretty much like relationships we build with people. So let me give you some of my own examples. For instance, I tend to have what Fournier called the best friendship relationship with a brand such as Innocence Movies, because I support the brand. It costs a bit more, but you know, it gives me the health benefit. I lead a healthy life, and I like, you know, all their CSR. So basically, we have a two-way benefit to derive from our relationship. Then you might have something called an arranged marriage, and I'll give you the example of me having to use Vanish when I'm washing my clothes in the washing machine, just because my mother told me use Vanish each and every time you actually do your clothes. I don't necessarily want it or like it, but she says so, so I kind of have to do it. So it's more like an arranged marriage. You can also have something called a committed partnership. You stick to a brand because you know it's going to be useful. You don't really need it. Just like I don't maybe need so much my Amazon Kindle, but I made a pledge to myself that I'm going to use my Amazon Kindle. So I have such a committed partnership. All right, I guess you get the picture. These metaphors are helpful to understand that we might actually relate to brands just like we relate to people. And to document this even better, I'll show you what some new neuropsychological research has done. Basically, I'm going to show you two brands that I have in my life. One of them is actually the Kindle, and this is one of my newer brand relationships. So I acquired the Kindle quite recently. And a brand such as Innocence Movies is a brand that has been there in my life for at least 2 years now, ever since I moved to the UK. So it's an older brand relationship I have. So what they did in this study, they showed people brands that either were in their lives for some time, compared to new brands that just appeared in their lives versus brands they were not even buying or not considering. And what actually they've shown, they used this emotional, they used skin conductance responses, which means that people were connected to such sensors as shown here, and this can measure your emotional arousal. What does this mean? Is that when people feel emotionally aroused, their skin is going to have more moisture, and therefore is going to conduct the electricity even better. So it's not a big volume of electricity, as you can imagine, but you can measure that. And when you measure that, you can actually gauge the emotional arousal of people. And they've shown that when people were presented with brands that they newly started to like and they started building a relationship with, they felt emotional arousal, just like we feel when we fall in love with somebody. So falling in love, you know, when people fall in love, they are emotionally aroused. And they discovered that was the case for new brands. Older brands in our lives, even though we like them a lot and we are loyal to them, didn't elicit such a skin response. And brands we don't have a relationship in our lives, didn't elicit any response at all. So what's happening with the brands that have been there in our lives for some time? So because obviously it seems like we do not feel love for them anymore. Is it the same with people? I don't know. But basically what they did for in another study, in another experiment, they looked at what was happening in people's brains. They looked at what was happening through functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and they actually found that when people saw or were presented with brands that have been in their lives for a long time, the insula, which is one of the parts of our brains, was getting activated. And the insula is actually related to phenomena such as addiction, interpersonal love, loss aversion, urging. Just like when we are in a relationship for a long time with a certain somebody, we feel this dependence, right? And it seems that a brand that has been in our lives for a long time would elicit a similar response. So you see, this is pretty much like with people, right? You tend to fall in love like crazy. Maybe it's not love you feel 2-3 years on, but you certainly feel the dependence. And this is pretty much what's happening with us and brands. Brands leave their marks on children's brains. What would you think about that one? Just because we are in the UK and many people here are British, I guess many people here would have been exposed to British gas as a brand early in their lifetime, right? So this is a brand that has been around in the UK for quite some time. EDF is a newer brand, a brand that just entered the UK a few years back. So we have here an early age brand for many of us and a later age brand in the UK, the EDF. Basically, in one study, they showed that this matters quite a bit. And in the first study, they had students try to identify brands that they either were exposed to in their lives before 5 years old or after 5 years old. And actually, they discovered that people were much faster to identify the brands they were exposed to or they learned about before they were 5 years old. In another study, so this first study was done with students. In another study, they used people who were over the age of 50. And those people over the age of 50 were asked to identify the brands again. And actually, the brands they identified most rapidly were the brands they were exposed to as kids. Whereas new brands that appeared were identified more slowly in terms of how rapidly you report that you recognize the brand, you identify it, and so on. The brands that were were the fastest identified were the brands that were there when you were a kid and were still in the market. So repetition and is important. But what we take from this is that what we learn as kids is very rapidly accessible from a cognitive point of view. And why is that important in marketing terms? Ease of processing many times leads to liking and to preference. So therefore, I think many of us have examples of brands we know ever since we were kids and are still very dear to us. And one of the reasons is that they are very easily accessible. Just a few more slides on the dark side of branding. And I just want to show some examples here. This very interesting study talked about materialism in adolescence. And actually, we have many teenagers these days, and many adolescents, trying to display such possessions, fancy brands, luxury brands, and so on. In this study, they showed that lacking social support from your family and your peers makes many teenagers want to own and display such brands because they have to boost their self-perception. They don't feel good on the social side, so they have to reestablish the balance by owning stuff and by displaying these things. And actually, the sheer materialism of your parents and of your peers affect your materialism as well. But I think this draws quite a bit of an alarm signal, right? The less social support you have in your life from family and peers, the more you actually try to resort to such possessions. So this is a bit of a dark side of branding, to be frank. This is a very cool study. This is a bit of an older one from '89, but basically displaying brands oftentimes increases with insecurity. Many of us have a certain identity we want to strive for, or we do strive for, but we're not really sure we're getting there. So when we are insecure, we tend to actually buy into brands that actually would communicate this identity. And I'm going to show you two of their experiments here. They asked either students studying law versus long-time attorneys, whether people perceive them as a lawyer or potential lawyer, and if so, why? And when asked these questions, the people in their study, law students versus practicing attorneys, law students said that 84% of them said that yes, they do perceive me as being a potential lawyer, whereas lawyers said that quite few of them said that people do perceive them as lawyers. And when people were asked why, and law students said, look, we speak in a certain way, we dress in a certain way, we drive certain cars. So this would basically mean that people can tell what we are like and what we stand for by just seeing our external cues. And by and large, the actually long-time attorneys didn't agree to this, or agreed to this to a much lesser extent than students did. And many of these long-time attorneys said, there's no way that people can tell what I am by just seeing my external cues, right? So we see that students' insecurity about their striven for identity made them want to communicate their identity with brands and with possessions. They did the same for tennis players, actually. And these are committed tennis players, either new tennis players that are really committed to the sport and want to make it big, or people who have been doing it for 3-4 years and they kind of know how good they are and what they stand for. And they asked these people, for playing tennis, do you prefer clothing of a particular company or brand? And the novices said 63% said that yes, compared to the experts that said only them said that 40% of them said that this is the case, they have to display brands. So actually displaying brands and actually communicating their identity was much more important for novices in tennis, which have this striven for identity. And this is, one more point on signaling status with luxury brands. And yes, please.
Make a comment. I wonder whether it's displaying brands increases with insecurity in this example, or whether that's perceived as a mechanism of building a brand, displaying certain, of building your own personal brand.
So as we said before, people use brands for many reasons. So there are many reasons why somebody would display a brand. The role of brands as helping one communicate their identity is very important, by all means. So this is one of the main benefits we get from brands, besides the functional benefits. So I know what I'm buying when I'm buying a Toyota, right? But I might want to communicate that I'm in a certain way by buying a Toyota Prius. There is also an experiential side to the benefits that we get from brands. So I'm not going to say that using brands to communicate one's identity is wrong. I do it myself. I buy my Virgin smoothies. I use my, I use my Kindle. I'm just buying. Most of the clothing I'm buying is from Fat Face because I kind of like this shop and it represents me and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying necessarily that it is wrong, but in some situations, insecurity might be triggering this. And I think it's a very interesting one, how and why this happens. Because people who actually are not insecure about their identity do not report the same extent of being, having to actually display brands for it. And the last slide on signaling status with luxury brands. We just talked about this. Many people use luxury brands to actually communicate their status. What do they stand for in life and so on. And I'm just going to talk about the brand Gucci because this is what was analyzed in this article. Some Gucci glasses can have a Gucci here, so it's quite salient, quite loud, but this is a Gucci one, so people can see it. Whereas other Gucci glasses tend, to be quiet. You cannot really tell that they have Gucci on them. The same, and maybe even more salient, when we have handbags. Some handbags, from Gucci have a very big featured logo, whereas other Gucci handbags don't have, very strongly, loudly presented logos. The funny thing is that the ones that cost most are the ones that actually don't have these things displayed so saliently. Actually, what they did in this study, they managed to derive a segmentation for why people use this, and how people relate to luxury brands, and what are the drives for these people using such brands. And they came up with 2 dimensions. It depends on the one hand on how much of an affluent versus a non-affluent consumer you are, and whether you have a low need for status versus a high need for status. What they found at the end of the day is that buying into luxury brands is a function of whether you want to associate yourself with a certain social group and dissociate yourself from other social groups. So looking at these 2 dimensions, the guys who are affluent and have a low need for status, they don't need to show off, they associate with their own kind, and they tend to buy these kinds of quiet products, even though they pay more for them. You know, they know that the ones who really know this brand would know what they buy anyway, and they don't have to make a strong statement or allow a statement about what brand they buy. But then on the other hand, you have affluent consumers with a high need for status. In their case, it's very important to say, hey, I'm not like you. And in that case, they want to signal dissociation from non-affluence and buy loud luxury goods such as Gucci's. For non-affluents with low need for status, they don't buy into luxury brands. You know, there's no need to buy them. But you also have non-affluents who do have a high need for status, and they want to be like the wealthy, and you know, they buy counterfeit goods. So we see that, you know, I'm trying to show you many ways in which brands impact our psychology, how brands, if properly built, can actually make a firm or a company very strong, and can protect it against scandals, can actually make it lead an entire market and actually get most of the profits from that market. I've recently seen some statistics about which companies make money in the smartphone market. And by and large, it's Apple that makes most of the money in that market. Samsung makes some money, but all the others, barely break even. And that's very interesting. And then I tried to show you how we relate to brands just like we relate to people. So actually, brands do have and do play a very important role in our lives. And lastly, I've been trying to show you that branding can have some negative consequences, and we should be aware of those in terms of public policy and leading people the right way. So thanks a lot for today. I really appreciate your presence here and your questions. I hope you have enjoyed this as well. Thanks a lot.